Hello everyone and welcome back to the lecture series of for the preparation of CLAT examination. In the previous lecture series, we were discussing about the important aspects of the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act. In the previous video, we have already discussed about the adoption as such, and in this current lecture series, we will be going to talk about the maintenance of the dependents and accordingly the provisions that gets entertained whenever we are talking about the maintenance as such. When you talk about maintenance as something which means that you are maintaining somebody out of the obligations of your relations. If you talk about the legislations which governs the maintenance, it is not only confined towards the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act. When we talk about maintenance as such, it is also under the Hindu Marriage Act, under the Hindu Marriage Act of 1955, you will find mention of maintenance under Section 24 and Section 25. So Section 24 and Section 25 of the Hindu Marriage Act also talks about maintenance. Here, where if we talk about the Hindu Marriage Act 1955 specifically, it is talking about the spouses as such. So spouses as such means that according to the Hindu Marriage Act, it is perhaps much more gender neutral. So it is both the obligation of both husband as well as wife to maintain each other if they are married towards each other. So the Hindu Marriage Act 1955 talks about maintenance, which is specifically talking about the maintenance by the other spouse. So in order to get a clear idea what exactly the maintenance is, first let's read out the provision of this is the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act of 1956. And in this particularly, we are talking about the definitions as such. And in the definitions, we have gone through section 3b, which says that maintenance shall include, in all cases, provisions for food, clothing, residence, education, medical attendance, and treatment. So, medical attendance, treatment, food, clothing, residence, education are all the essentials which are to be included under the definition of maintenance. So if we talk about maintenance as such, maintenance, if you see the provisions, it is not only through the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act, but also through the Hindu Marriage Act, which talks about maintenance. Here, the maintenance is of both the spouses. Okay, so it is the responsibility of both the spouses to manage each other. Second is the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act, which starts from Section 18 and goes till Section 25, which talks about maintenance. And here, when we talk about maintenance, it is not both the sides. It is not gender neutral, but it is gender specific. Under the Hindu Marriage Act, it is gender neutral. But when you talk about Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act, it is gender specific, and it is creating an obligation. It is creating an obligation over the husband to maintain the wife. Not only to the wife, but also to the parents, to the child, etc. So there is a different definitions under the different provisions. So you might get confused, sir, which definition has to be acknowledged. So what happens is that whenever there is a proceedings that needs to be there in the court, or whenever there is to be talk about in regards to any maintenance, the maintenance will be taken into consideration. Different applications will be submitted for different legislations. For example, if you want to take maintenance under the Hindu Marriage Act, then you will be requesting maintenance according to Section 24 of the Hindu Marriage Act. If you want to take maintenance under the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act, then you will be resorting to this particular section, which is talking about the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act. And there is another, perhaps there is one more provision or one more legislation which is allowing you to get maintenance, and that is section 125 of Code of Criminal Procedure. Code of Criminal Procedure. So CRPC, which has now been changed to the new legislation that has been brought into the criminal laws, but the old legislation which talks about the procedure that has to be applicable in regards to the criminal proceedings, under that section 125 talks about the maintenance. So by these three provisions you can get maintenance. But what exactly has to be taken what has to be taken into consideration when you talk about maintenance is that there is a person who is dependent, not able to maintain himself, herself, and in order to make sure that they have been taken into they have been provided all the requisites, all the essentials in the definition. If you talk about the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act, which talks about the food, clothing, residence, education, medical attendance and treatment. So all these things will be considered to be the part of maintenance. In the case of unmarried daughters, also reasonable expenses and of incident of her marriage. Okay, so all these informations provides you maintenance. Another thing is, so these things has to be there, okay, in case of persons who are dependent. Let's try to understand what exactly Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act suggests about the maintenance as such and how the maintenance needs to be there. The first and the foremost thing is that it is talking about maintenance of wife. So the wife needs to be maintained. It says that subject to the provisions of this section, a Hindu wife, whether married before or after the commencement of this act, shall be entitled to be maintained by her husband during her lifetime. A Hindu wife shall be entitled to live separately from a husband without forfeiting her claim to maintenance. This becomes a very important provision. That a husband shall be entitled to live separately from a husband without forfeiting her claim to maintenance if he is guilty of desertion, that is to say of abandoning her without reasonable cause and without her consent or against her wish or willfully neglect her. If he has treated her with such cruelty as to cause a reasonable apprehension in the mind that it will be harmful or injurious to the life with her husband. Okay. Now, reasonable apprehension in her mind that it will be harmful or injurious to live with her husband. If he has any other wife living, if he has a concubine living in the same place in which his wife is living or habitually resides with a concubine elsewhere, if he has ceased to be a Hindu by conversion or any religion, if there is any other cause justifying her living separately. Okay, a wife, Hindu wife, shall not be entitled to separate residence and maintenance from her husband if she is unchaste or ceases to be a Hindu or conversion to of another religion. Okay, so this is an important portion when you talk about maintenance to wife. Wife, even if she is living separately, she can claim maintenance. The reason, the requisite for the same is that the husband should be treated her with cruelty. He would have abandoned her. He is not has another wife, is living with a concubine. The concubine is another female, but not wife. Okay, this is a sort of adultery here. But adultery is obviously from the male side. But if you talk about concubine is perhaps the same. If he has ceased to be a Hindu by conversion to another religion, if there is any other justifiable cause to live separately. Now the second thing is maintenance of widowed daughter-in-law. Okay, a husband-wife, a Hindu wife, whether married before or after the marriage, commencement of this, shall be entitled to be maintained after the death of her husband by the father-in-law. Father-in-law has to maintain, provided that and to the extent that she is unable to maintain herself out of her own earnings or other property, or where she has no property of her own, is unable to obtain maintenance from the estate of her husband or from her father or mother, from her son or daughter, if any, or has an estate. Okay. Okay. This is done. Any obligation under subsection 1 shall not be enforceable if the father-in-law has not the means to do so from the co-partnership property in his possession, out of which the daughter-in-law has not obtained any share, and any such obligation shall cease to on the remarriage of the. Okay. Now, second is the maintenance of children and age-old parents. Okay, this is also the obligation of the husband or the male to maintain the children and the age-old parents. The first thing, subject to the provisions of this section, a Hindu is bound during her marriage lifetime. So it can be both the male as well as the female, if they are Hindu, to maintain his or her legitimate or illegitimate children as her aged or infant parents. A legitimate or illegitimate child may claim maintenance from his father or mother so long as the child is minor. Okay. Now, the obligation for a person to maintain his or her aged or infirm parents or a daughter who is unmarried extends in so far as the parents or the unmarried daughter, as the case may be, is unable to manage himself or herself out of his or her own earnings or other property. In this section, parents include childless stepmother. Dependents defined. For the purpose of the chapter, dependents meaning the following: relatives of the deceased, his or her father, this is also dependent, his or her mother, his widow, so long as they do not marry. Okay, so these are dependent. His or her son or the predeceased son, all these comes under the dependent. Okay, all these comes under the definition of the dependent. Okay, maintenance of the dependent. So these are categorically mentioned that who all will be considered to be the dependents. Okay, now let's move forward. The maintenance of the dependents, subjected to the provisions of section 2, the heirs of the deceased Hindu are bound to maintain the dependents of the deceased out of the estates inherited by them for the deceased. Okay, this perhaps is not very important for you, but just to make your people aware that there should be there is a codification of laws for the dependents also. Even if you are not husband and wife, but you are dependent in certain manner over the persons who are acquiring the property, they are obligated to maintain you. Okay, now the amount of maintenance. It shall be in discretion to the court to determine whether any, and if so, what maintenance shall be awarded under the provisions of this act, and in doing so, the court shall have the due regard to the consideration set out in subsection 2 or subsection 3 as the case may be, so far as applicable. In determining the amount of maintenance, if any, to be awarded to the wife, children, or aged or infirm parents under this act, the first and the foremost thing that needs to be clear is the position and the status of the parties, the reasonable wants of the claimants, if the claimant is represented separately, whether the claimant is justified in doing so. So these are the three requisites that needs to be fulfilled. The value of the claimant's property. This is the three requisites. The value of the claimant's property and any income derived from such property on from claimant's own earning or from any other sources. Okay, from claimant's own earning or from any other sources. The number of persons entitled to maintain under the act. In determining the amount of maintenance, if any, to be awarded to the dependent under this act, regard shall be had to the net value of the estate of the deceased after providing the payment of his debt. The net value of the estate of the deceased after providing the payments of his debt. So these are all the conditions that needs to be fulfilled when you talk about the important requisites of the provisions, if any, made under a will of the deceased is in respect of the dependent, the degree of relationship between the two, the reasonable wants of the dependents, the past relations between the dependents is all the same. It is almost the same. Okay, it is almost the same. Claim commitment to maintenance should be a Hindu. No person shall be entitled to be a maintenance under this chapter if he or she has ceased to be a Hindu by religion. Amount of maintenance may be altered or changed in change of circumstances. The amount of maintenance, whether fixed or by a degree or code by agreement either before or after the commencement of this act, may be altered subsequently if there is a material change in the circumstances justifying such alteration. Debts have priority subsequently to the provisions contained in section 37. Debts of any description contrary or payable by the deceased shall be prioritized over the claimants of the dependents over the maintenance of the other. Okay, so maintenance when to be a charge. A dependent's claim for maintenance under this act shall not be a charge on the estate of the deceased or any portion thereof unless one has been created by will of the deceased by a degree of quote by agreement between the dependents and the owners of the estate or the portion otherwise. Okay. So these are the important provisions which we talk about whenever we are talking about maintenance as such. It is only specifically when we are talking in regards to the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act. Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act of 1956. Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act gives right to the dependents over first wife, second parents and children, parents and child, and the third one be dependents. So you can always claim these informations and these disparities in order to make sure that whatsoever your demands are, whatsoever your wishes are fulfilled in a clear, crystal clear and precise manner. Because what happens is that once you have knowledge and you have acquaintances in regards to that particular claim, that this is my right, I need to get that. So in this particular legislation is going to be very much helpful for you in order to gain the maintenance that is due to you by the form of maintenance. So with this, we have completed the maintenance portion also in regards to the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act. Now, we will be focusing directly over the maintenance in regards to the section 125 CRPC, where which it is talking about the dependents as wife, age-old parents and the dependents. The same which has been mentioned in the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act, the same has been mentioned under the CRPC section 125. So that is why it is important to make sure that whatsoever our deals are, whatsoever our situations are, we are actually getting rightful authority from the same, and this is how the things will be beneficial for us. With this, I would request you again to kindly make sure that you are consistently revising the whole syllabus and the pattern so that you are able to clear your examination with flying colors. With this, I would like to thank you again for being present in this video, and we will start with a new chapter or perhaps a new syllabus, new legislations as such. We will be talking about the international law and how the international law is important. Apart from that, we will also study about the intellectual property rights. So these are the two important things. The two important chapters, or if I'll say the portion of your syllabus which is left, and from the next video onwards we are going to start with that same. Okay, with this I would like to thank you again for being present in this video. Till then, take care, and please keep in mind the three principles that we always expect you to remember. The first is obviously remembering the principle that we have studied so far, then obviously the practice, and third being the persistency. If you maintain these things, then nobody is going to stop you from clearing your CLAT examination. With this, again, I would like to thank you all. Bye-bye. Take care, guys.